We're back with more News Talks, Saga 960. Mark Petrone with you. So very glad you could join us on this edition of the Mark Petrone Show. Well, the plot thickens in terms of who's to blame for the fact that Brenda Lucki is now accused of interfering in a police investigation, an RCB investigation into the murders in Nova Scotia of 22 people. Now, of course, as the government scurries for cover, they're also circling the wagons around Brenda Lucki, who really is at the center of the scandal. She now stands accused of sticking her nose into that investigation on behalf of her government paymasters in order to try and push a political agenda around gun control. Here's the state broadcaster with a story now. Mountie, who wrote that RCMP had interfered. Mountie, who wrote that RCMP had interfered with Nova Scotia investigation, came to his own conclusions. Yeah, he experienced it differently. That, according to Minister Blair, the story in the state broadcaster, RCMP Brenda Lucki denies a claim that she interfered in a Nova Scotia shooting investigation. And this is at the heart of this whole thing. Did she interfere? And if she did, then she deserves to be fired. But more than that, did she interfere because of the political pressures placed on her? Cosmin, Georgia, joining us, independent journalist with TNC.news, True North. And he continues to do stellar work with that organization, that publication. Cosmin, you're watching this unfold. What's your take on how the government is handling it and what may happen if, in fact, it's established that Brenda Lucki did, in fact, interfere?
Well, the saying is something's rotten in the state of Denmark. We've seen a pattern with the Trudeau government not respecting the independence of certain institutions like the justice system, law enforcement, etc. I think this report by the Halifax Examiner raises some very serious questions. Just the thought of the government politicizing a horrendous massacre like the Nova Scotia mass shooting is disgusting, and it needs to be probed immediately. We're approaching the Parliament going on recess, and I think there should be some sort of an emergency meeting or committee investigating allegations because they're of the most serious kind.
Yeah, and rather than focus on what Brenda Lucki did, unfortunately, the Conservative Party of Canada is so hell-bent on getting Trudeau that they miss the evidence that's looming them, that's staring them in the face. But let's read this story in the CBC. Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair is casting doubt on the Nova Scotia Mountie who suggested that Commissioner Brenda Lucki interfered in the investigation into the largest mass shooting in Canadian history. The former public safety minister's comments came as the political firestorm around the head of the National Police Force spills into a second day. That explosive allegation was contained in a handwritten note or notes from Nova Scotia RCMP Superintendent Darren Campbell, which were released this week as part of the Mass Casualty Commission probe. And it prompted Lucki to come out and say, I didn't interfere, but I think that those notes bear out what really happened. I think Superintendent Campbell really is the one with the moral heft here, because we know that we can't trust Brenda Lucki. We certainly can't trust Blair. We can't trust anybody in the PMO. So, I don't see why anybody at the heart of why the superintendent in Halifax would lie about something like that. I think he was calling it as he saw it. He said he was confused. He doesn't understand why it was that the RCMP commissioner kept pressuring him and the investigating officers to release information about firearms to the media. Why? That doesn't make any sense when clearly it'll justify that investigation. And how did she respond, Cosmin? She had a hissy fit. She said she was disappointed and sad by the response, and it made her look bad. Clearly there was a reason why. Why would you push the idea that this information be made public about the origins of these firearms and what type of firearms were used? Why would you push that? Why would you push the investigating officers into releasing that information to the public if it wasn't for some kind of political reason. I don't know. To me, the idea that Blair would go after the superintendent in Halifax just shows how desperate these people are to keep a lid on this scandal.
For sure. And if you know anything about law enforcement, it's not easy to become a superintendent. These are trusted individuals tasked in this particular case with handling the response, the public response to that mass shooting tragedy. So this is a career killer for a superintendent to go against their authorities and their higher ranking officers and put this on the public record. There's a huge amount of risk involved. And, the question remains, why would somebody, as you said, fabricate such a claim that would put their entire career in jeopardy? And as we've seen, the Liberal government is refusing to respond in any serious way. They're deflecting, and they're starting to zero in on who they can pick as a fall guy, a patsy to blame everything on. As we saw with the SNC Lavalin scandal, this is just usual business for the Liberal government.
Yeah, it's really tragic. It's horrible. I mean, here's a superintendent who's trying to do his job, and he gets blamed all of a sudden just because he told the truth. And I like the fact that in the notes, and it comes out in the Halifax Examiner story, he says, these are facts and I stand by them. So he's not wavering one iota, and I like that. But they'll push him. They'll push him to try and recant, like this is some kind of inquisition and a witch hunt. They'll go after him. They'll pressure him. So if he has any guts, and I believe he probably does, he'll stand by what he said.
For sure. We're talking about the integrity of an investigation, right? In those notes, he mentions, we need the time to coordinate with our U.S. counterparts because in this particular crime, there is the suspicion of arms being smuggled into Canada, which were used in this massacre. So it seems from what we know so far that this superintendent was trying to protect the integrity of this investigation. He was trying to keep things tight while the situation was unfolding and the police was learning more and more. Yet we have here, the head of the RCMP saying, screw all that. Let's get it out to the public. Let's show them how bad guns are when used by a maniac criminal, so that we can justify future, gun control measures, which Trudeau promptly jumped on this situation, politicized it, announced soon after all these different bills, orders, and councils that targeted law-abiding firearm owners without actually addressing the root of this problem, which is illegal smuggling, guns being sold by criminal organizations, etc.
Yeah, it was amazing how quickly, the bodies weren't even cold. Sorry for making a crude analogy here, but they didn't even have an accurate body count before Trudeau comes out and tries to make hay on this and exploit that disaster in Nova Scotia in order to push a gun control agenda, which he had in his back pocket and just waiting for the opportunity for something to happen. And so to me, I think that this is very credible, the idea that somehow the government would be pressuring the release of information which they felt would have helped push forward a gun control agenda. And the fact that they are now trying to pretend all this, showing all this fake indignation. Oh, how could you even think such a thing, that we would exploit something like a disaster, like what happened in Nova Scotia, in order to push forward an agenda? That's they act like they're shocked, like they're destroyed, like they're outraged, when in fact it's what they do all the time. I mean, they make a habit of exploiting things that happen. I mean, anytime, even when it happened after what happened in Texas, what did they do? I mean, they immediately launched into a handgun action, a freeze on the sale of those things. Let's listen a little bit to this exchange on the state broadcaster as the questioner asked, was there discussions in the back rooms here that were aimed at trying to exploit this disaster in Nova Scotia to push an agenda? Let's listen.
Can you tell Canadians watching tonight that there were no discussions between staff members in the PMO or the public safety minister or his staff members and the commissioner of the RCMP during the time or thereafter of the shooting that involved upcoming gun control legislation? Was gun control legislation ever discussed in this context?
Actually, I think
staff members in the PMO or the public safety minister or his staff members and the commissioner of the RCMP during the time or thereafter of the shooting that involved upcoming gun control legislation? Was gun control legislation ever discussed in this context?
Actually, I think I'm very concerned to hear my colleague even assert that our government would seek to play politics with a tragedy. This is not how our government operates. It's not how we have operated in the past. It's not how we're going to operate in the future. The idea that somehow there is a group of people that are sitting in a room going, oh, let's find a way to capitalize on the mass murder of Canadians is absolutely appalling, and it should be condemned in the strongest possible terms. That someone even contemplate making an accusation like that. The fact of the matter is that the RCMP work independently of the federal government. And as a former public servant who worked in the Department of Public Safety, I can tell you, having worked with past commissioners of the RCMP, it is not, the RCMP is very clear about not becoming a political tool of the government, regardless of who is in power. And I think it is important for us to stop.
Excuse me, but they are a political tool. All we have to do, Cosmin, is look at the decision by the RCMP commissioner not to lay charges of fraud against this prime minister or anybody in the PMO over the Aga Khan matter, using the excuse that it was not politically advantageous to the public, that it was not good for the public in order to make such a move. Well, what is that but a political move in order to protect the person who appointed her? I mean, this is the most politicized RCMP we've ever seen in the history of the country, to the detriment of Canadians. What do you think about that, Cosmin?
Well, I think Mr. Noor Mohammed's response is classic political deflection. I mean, he conceives of this straw man about a group of people plotting behind closed doors, which is completely ridiculous. Like that, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a subtle direction of the RCMP by the Minister of Public Safety. It's completely ludicrous to attack the people making the accusations. How about you actually address the what's at hand here, which is a very serious, potentially illegal thing that happened to politicize the tragedy.
Yeah, they certainly did politicize it, Cosmin, and just to hear this guy talk like display such a level of indignation as if they would never do such a thing. I mentioned this. Imagine what happened in Uvalde in Texas. I mean, they were Johnny on the spot with a handgun freeze right after that. I mean, the idea that they don't exploit incidents, that's all they do is exploit events, even when they're not in Canada. I mean, when was it that they pushed the abortion issue in Canada, even though it was completely irrelevant to what was going on in Canada, when it came out that the Supreme Court of the United States may be looking at overturning Roe v. Wade? They immediately exploited that as a way to attack the Tories, for somehow looking to roll back abortion rights in Canada. I mean, the idea that this is outrageous, the outrageous claim by the fact that, by what's going on with the RCMP is in and of itself outrageous. That guy's I cannot believe that he would try to pass that off.
Yeah, it's not outrageous at all. We're talking about a government which in February invoked the Emergencies Act and stuck police, all federal, provincial, and municipal police on peaceful protesters. So the question of political interference has already been dealt with during the SNC-Lavalin scandal, when Trudeau was found to have breached ethic laws. This is a government that has a history of political interference. I think the only tune it plays is to politically interfere in so-called independent institutions. We see it in the military, we see it in policing, we see it in the justice system. The government has no respect, and we hear, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau going on all these rants about how populist candidates like Pierre Poilievre are jeopardizing the independence of the Central Bank of Canada. Meanwhile, Trudeau, throughout his tenure, has done everything in his power to interfere in Canadian institutions to get his own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Cosmin, Georgia, joining us on Saga 960. Let's listen to the interim leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I personally think that they should be going after Brenda Lucki rather than focusing immediately on the political side of the equation. But here she says that this is disgusting to know that the Prime Minister and his office would use the death of Canadians for his own political gain. Let's listen.
I want to tell everyone that Conservatives believe Superintendent Darren Campbell, when he says that Brenda Lucki, the commissioner, pressured the RCMP, and the reason she did it was because she had made a commitment, or she had been pressured by the Prime Minister's office and or the Public Safety Minister's office. We believe Superintendent Campbell. This is disgusting to know that the Prime Minister and his office would use the death of Canadians for his own political gain. But unfortunately, we have seen it before. We believe very strongly the Prime Minister, his office, and the Minister of Public Safety's office, and the Minister of Public Safety, the former minister, have to be held accountable. We will make sure that that happens. Now, right now, they are denying wrongdoing. This is a pattern. This is what this Prime Minister does. You will recall with SNC-Lavalin, the Globe broke the story, and the Prime Minister looked in the camera and said, "I did not pressure the Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould." We know now that was not true. So when the Minister of Public Safety looks in the camera and says, "I did not pressure the Commissioner," it's very, very difficult to believe that. So we're going to hold them accountable and get to the bottom of what happened.
How are you going to do that? Are you thinking about a summer committee?
We believe there needs to be a full investigation. If the Minister and the Prime Minister have nothing to hide, they'll hide nothing. They will be completely transparent, not be hiding documents, not be hiding emails, or hiding behind cabinet confidence.
But the commissioner of the RCMP is no shrinking violet. They're, no commissioner of the RCMP has ever been a pushover. So surely, is she not acting in her own actions?
Surely it would appear from what the superintendent said, surely she wasn't. So she'll have to answer for that. But at the end of the day, it's the Prime Minister and the Minister of Public Safety. The Prime Minister has a habit of doing this, using people, using his influence for his own political gain and interfering in criminal investigations, and in this case, an investigation into the biggest mass killing in Canadian history. One more.
Okay, so I think they're going about it the wrong way. I think they need to bring down Brenda. And then once they've established that she did interfere and that she accepts accountability for that, then you follow the breadcrumbs up the chain, up the political ladder to Blair, the PMO, and the Prime Minister himself. But until she goes, they have sort of they have a way of saying, well, it's our word against theirs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the political difficulty for the Conservatives is to also not appear as interfering in the public service, right? Like, so I think the way they're going about it is, I presumably hope that Brenda Lucki will be isolated and sort of investigated by an independent source. But focusing in on the PMO makes sense from a political perspective, in the sense, as Candace Bergen says, they have a pattern of doing this, and they were mentioned within the report. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. We've sort of seen the Liberals rally a little bit behind Brenda Lucki, so they could potentially use her to deflect. But I think the situation is evolving, and I think the idea of calling an immediate summer session and investigation into this is good. But I do have some doubts about how effective it will be to keep this government to account, whether Trudeau gets another ethics violation or it's Bill Blair. Will it actually cause any significant political change or a significant change within the electorate? I do think people are getting tired of the Liberals. But unfortunately, we've seen the Canadian people be willing to put up with a lot of abuse and of power with Justin Trudeau, which is unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, but sadly, I don't know. I think Canadians are at their wits' end over this. I mean, the Liberals are at what, 30% support. I think they're really frustrated with the fact that Jagmeet Singh continues to support this government. I mean, how much longer do you think the NDP can do that? I mean, it's scandal after scandal. It's the Melanie Joly scandal with the Russians. It's the Emergencies Act. It's Marco Mendicino under pressure after he lied about getting about having the police ask for the Emergencies Act. So it's one after the other. I mean, is this going to pressure Jagmeet Singh into caving and finally saying, enough is enough. I can't support you guys. I'm not going down with the Titanic.
Yeah, that would definitely be the best outcome, but it would mean an election if, let's say, the Trudeau government loses a motion of confidence. But Jagmeet Singh's words publicly and his actions ring hollow. He tries to condemn these things. He says it's worrying him, but he continues to prop up the Trudeau government in exchange for policy favors, and keeping him in power for the next 3 years. So I seriously doubt Jagmeet Singh's commitment to challenging this, but we'll have to wait and see. The NDP have pushed back a little bit in committees, especially the Emergencies Act, but then again, we know that they supported it. So they constantly play this political theater of pretending opposition when in fact they're there to fully go along with the Liberals' plans.
On the economic front, Cosmin, we're seeing inflation at 7.7%. That's the official number. A rate we haven't seen since 1983. To what degree will ultimately that be the undoing of this government? I mean, people can ignore these scandals all they want, but at the end of the day, if it starts to hit their pocketbooks, if they can't afford, to put gas in the car, at some point, that's going to be what really pushes the Trudeau gang out the door. What do you think?
For sure. I've said before that perhaps this Trudeau term could be a blessing in disguise to completely discredit the Liberals' economic policies, because, as we see, they are currently managing one of the biggest downturns in our economy in nearly half a century with respect to inflation, at least. We saw a recent report come out of the Fraser Institute, which shows that despite being the second highest country to accumulate debt out of 30 developed nations, Canada had some of the worst economic performance when it comes to unemployment rates, etc. So we've taken on all this debt. The Trudeau government refuses to take any accountability for our current economic situation. They won't lower the gas tax or temporarily suspend it. They continue to hike the carbon tax. We just saw this week, it was in the news today, U.S. President Joe Biden is going to the House of Representatives to ask them to temporarily suspend the gas tax. And in the U.S., they have way lower gas prices than we do. And the amount of tax that takes up the cost of gas at the pump is much less. So our government is just stubborn, obstinate. They're willing to clutch onto this ideologically driven framework to achieve their political goals. in the spite of everything else, in the spite of Canadian families suffering to put food on the table, people struggling to catch up with inflation rates because their wages and salaries aren't going up, and they're having to sacrifice all sorts of things pretty much due to the blame of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, and those who have brought us to this situation.
Yeah, and they seem to think that spending more and borrowing more will deal with the inflation. So it's throwing gasoline on the fire. This tweet from, go ahead, deal with that.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous because we always see Trudeau and others saying that, politicians like Poilievre or just like populists in general are providing easy solutions to difficult questions, when in reality, our government has just thrown money at everything. We just saw it with the $500 payment to renters that Chrystia Freeland elaborated on. We see it with all the other sorts of little payments to the electorate, which it's bread and circuses, right? They hope that these temporary sort of alleviating the situation temporarily will actually fix anything, when in reality these are systemic issues brought on by policy.
And we have this tweet from Pierre Poilievre today. Canadians are going hungry, and they're desperate for an end to food inflation. May's food inflation includes food purchased from stores, 9.7%, meat, 9%, butter, pasta, 17%, lettuce, 21%, tomatoes, almost 17%. So he clearly believes that this is something that may help drive his bid for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. But I mean, it is what Canadians care about. They don't care about climate change. They don't care about race baiting. They care about what's hurting them personally at home. They care about feeding their families. Here's Poilievre saying the Canadians are going hungry. I don't know. That's a pretty powerful statement, suggesting that Canadians now have reached a point of having to choose between who eats in their family. And it also points to just how out of touch the Trudeau government is, doesn't it? I mean, at this point, if Trudeau's yakking about climate change and people are worried about food, it shows just how out of touch this idiot is. I don't know. What do you think?
I think the longer Canada goes without economic recovery, the more precarious the Liberal government's position will be, having spent all this money to stimulate the economy. If that's unsuccessful, I do think we're going to reach a point where we will see them brought down by the electorate, whether there's an election when it's scheduled in 3 years or one before that. And it's when I'm just looking at the statistics, what people are, what the agriculture sector are saying in committee and what they're testifying, it looks pretty bleak. And these are downstream effects by consumers, a lot of which are related to the cost of fertilizer, the cost of transporting things due to the high gas prices. All food stuff gets transported using gasoline. Who would have known, right? So it's definitely becoming more bleak, and it's not only food. We saw a report out of one of the largest energy regulators in North America that said certain parts of the United States and Canada will have blackouts, like more than ordinary, because of the cost of electricity and just the lack of infrastructure in the last few years to maintain the electrical grid. So it's not only the cost of food, it's also other aspects of life, like the cost of gas, heating your home, and other bills you have to pay. We see prices go up all over the place just for services, not only goods. So I think Canadians will continue to deal with a difficult time, and eventually they will look for answers and for somebody to blame, because the constant response of this is a global issue, high gas prices is a global issue, the airport stuff is a global issue, inflation is a global issue, the supply chain is a global issue, is not enough. It's a cop out. Take some responsibility. The government needs to admit it's let things go out of control, and they need to pull some levers within their power, because there are levers to pull, and they need to do that immediately to alleviate suffering for millions of Canadians and families.
Well, we'll see if they do the right. They're not in the habit of doing the right thing. So, I mean, if they were, they'd immediately drop the carbon tax, but they're not going to do that. Thank you, Cosmin. Appreciate that.
No problem.
Check out Cosmin George's terrific work in the pages of tnc.news, True North. Appreciate Cosmin coming on this show. That's it for this edition of the Mark Petronis Show. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's do it again soon, shall we? Stay safe, be strong. Bye-bye for now.